right, we're going to talk about the home front. That's what we call America during World War II. So we are going to discuss that. So the first thing that we see when war is declared is we see everybody becoming very patriotic. So people are willing to do whatever it takes to win this war and defeat Hitler and save our allies. And, like right now, we see a lot of the same thing. We see people, willing to do what it takes to do what's best for America. And we saw it on 9/11. You didn't see it, obviously, but everyone had American flag stickers on their cars, and everyone wore the flag, and it was very patriotic time. Now, just like right now, we have some, a few idiots who feel like they're being oppressed because we're being asked to do what's necessary to save the whole population. You did have, a few outliers that like to raise a stink and complain, and they were Hitler sympathizers. The Germans did nothing to us, blah, blah, blah. So, but for the most part, most people, are willing to buckle down and sacrifice and do what they have to do. So back, just like in World War I, we see the recycling and the collection of materials to be repurposed for war. We see people understanding that they're not going to be able to buy all the products that they want, but a black market will rise up because people need the things that they need. But people were expected to use ration cards in order to buy the supplies that they needed in limited amounts so that the food sources could be used to supplement the troops overseas. And people were okay with that. We get it. The Victory Garden, again, we've seen a huge resurgence in people planting gardens. Seed companies have sold out online because modern people realize how fragile the food system and the food supply is. And that's what they did in World War II. It was called a victory garden. You planted vegetables so that, the vegetables in the mainstream could be sent over to the troops. Now, blackout is when you covered up your windows and things so that no light escaped. And this was very important because unlike in World War I, in World War II, you have fighter planes that are much easier to get across the ocean. We have aircraft carriers. We have the ability, or countries have the ability to send bombers, and they bomb at night, and they bomb where there's light, where there's people. So blackout was used so that when if a fighter plane were to come, they're not going to be able to see any light at nighttime. They're not going to see where the cities are, where people are populated. Now, we don't really need, we didn't know, but we didn't really need to do the blackout like England did. England was under attack constantly by the Luftwaffe. But we were worried and suspicious about the Japanese, particularly on the West Coast. So we did what we needed to do. Now, civil defense drills. So your civil defense is who is there to take care of things should you have problems at home. It's usually people who can't serve in the military for whatever reason. They're too old, they have flat feet, they have some kind of limitation that prevents glasses, that prevents them from being able to fight with the troops. So they're at home, guarding the coastlines and, protecting people as best they can and being points of information. So they're like the home defense system. All right. So people become more conservative, and that don't take that in the modern sense of what conservative and liberal means, because they're just completely bastardized in the modern era. Even 30 years ago, this is not what the political spectrum looked like. But people are willing to let the government do its job and protect the people and fight the wars. And they, it's just what we need to do to protect ourselves. So, we're not worried about our own civil rights as much as we are worried about, being successful in winning this war that we have to win. Now, after the war's over, then people are going to pick up those social ideas again. Wow, look how big the government's gotten. And that was partially the New Deal and then World War II. But we needed big government in order to manage the scale of manufacture, of shipping, to win the war, and the nature of the economy. And now this enemy of communism. And we'll talk more about that later as we get into the Cold War. I'm sorry, I don't think I have pictures in this lecture, but you all know Rosie the Riveter. We can do it. I think the poster's in my room, or Miss Gallick borrowed it. I don't remember, but I know I have it somewhere. And this shift in manufacturing, shift in employment, shift in wages go up because they need laborers, is able to finish the job that the New Deal wasn't able to do. It's able to pump the money into the economy. So we not only have full employment, we have labor shortages. We don't have enough people to do the jobs. So again, we call on women, we call on, people of color, to fill in these holes so that we can manufacture. Now, manufacturing, they use the Defense Manufacturing Act and they shifted production. So you're not ever going to find a 1943 Ford, because Ford wasn't making cars in 1943. It was making tanks and planes and equipment. And that's what we do. We repurpose our industrial capacity to make products for the war instead. And this is how America comes out of this war as the country that has an economy that's booming. The rest of Europe is economically crippled. And we, because of our manufacturing prowess, come out on top with money to spare. We are a wealthy, wealthy nation at the end of World War II. So this is what's going to shift. One of the other things that happens is that instead of, just working 8-hour days, they're going to break factory production into 3 shifts. So you have people working 24 hours a day. So there's 3 shifts a day. Each one's 8 hours. And a lot of people, a lot of women worked 2 shifts a day. And sometimes they'd even come in for a half a shift or come cover. They'd go home and sleep for a couple hours and come back. And this was really pivotal to the supply chain for the war. All right. So because of the labor shortage, we allowed, there was a huge, and we didn't really get into it, but there was a huge social backlash against Mexican immigrants. And it was, the reason why marijuana is illegal and all kinds of other stuff was put into place as the oil companies were driving it. It's a whole long historic thing that we haven't really gotten into and we won't get into really here, but that there was a very anti-Mexican sentiment in the United States that had been manufactured. And so that needs to shift so that Mexican Americans can work and help us and be a part of this. We talked about women and a lot of things, like a lot of the advertisements are things like, my husband wants me to work. We're not seeing women as an independent source or entity, but we're seeing women as an outsource of their man's desires still, right? So my husband wants me to do this and help America. So anyway, but we do see women doing jobs where they're building and they're making planes and they're making weapons and they're working hard and they're welding and all this kind of stuff. So it is going to change how people feel about what a woman is capable of. All right. We still see a lot of labor anger. This is not a new thing. You know that. We've had labor struggles constantly. African Americans were needed to do the work, and white workers did not want to work with African Americans. They didn't want them being paid the same. There's a lot of anger, and a lot of it's rooted in racism. So what FDR does is tries to criminalize strikes for the most part. And if you go on strike, then they're going to penalize you and send you off to war and things like that, which is going to reduce it a little bit, but people are still angry. Excuse me. All right. So we're recycling. We are gathering scrap metal. We're using fats and explosives. Women can't buy nylons because nylons are all used for parachutes, things like that. War bonds, which we saw in World War I, those come back. All right. And then we see fashion change. And once France becomes occupied by the Nazis, that's the one and only time Paris is not the center of fashion and America is, right? So they shift the clothing expectations. And this is why we have this more relaxed society about clothes, as it starts here. So any kind of fabric that isn't necessary is cut out. So we don't have waistcoats anymore. We cut off those elbow patches. We want just as little fabric as possible. And again, that's going to change women's fashions particularly. And we're going to see very liberated styles with short skirts, legs showing, arms showing. And we'll talk about the bikini later. But the bikini comes into existence in this time period. It's named after a test bombing site, the Bikini Atoll, because it's hot, like the atomic bomb, right? Okay. We ration our goods and we're not able to use what we used before. If you wasted gasoline, the propaganda outlet compared that to helping Hitler. So you can't waste gas. You can't waste your tires. You can't waste sugar and meat, because these things are very limited. And the thing that happens is you've got particularly women, but a lot of people now, wages are up. They're working lots of hours, but they have nothing to buy with that money. And so we're going to see at the end of the war, as we go into the 50s, a shift into a spending economy. And spend, and buy this, and buy the best one, and buy another one. Because there's so much money, it's going to change the American mindset. All right. So we see people getting married before the man ships off to war. And then we also see people getting divorced. We see super high divorce rates once men start to come home because they're different people, or sometimes, they married under short circumstances, the drama of love and romance and separation. And then people get together and ooh, this is not going to work. So we see young people, excuse me, we see young people without adult supervision because parents are working all the time. So we see roving gangs of kids and things like that. Latchkey, that's what they called us in the 80s too. It's when you just, you're a kid, but you're in charge of taking care of yourself because your parents are not there. So there we go. Now, interestingly, it will become more popular to graduate from high school after the war. But during the war, and prior to that, there was no real push to graduate from high school. You got the education you needed and then you left. 6th grade, 8th grade, particularly women. But, farm kids and stuff, you just got what you needed and then you went home and worked on the farm. You didn't have to get a diploma. And that's going to shift. Partially because of these campaigns to get kids to stay in school, to keep them off the streets, but also because the nature of childhood is going to change in the 1950s. All right, so like we've been talking about, we see some positive benefits of World War II in the home of in the home front. So people have more money, they live longer, they have more rights, and there seems to be no end to the money that we're making. Now, one of the dark spots in our history with World War II was Japanese internment. So we had, the propaganda office created movies and, had a whole media campaign to get people to hate the Japanese, just like they did in World War I with the Germans. And it's very racist cartoons, like you can imagine. But then FDR makes an order to basically put Japanese people in concentration camps. Right. And these camps weren't necessarily camps for people. They were wherever they could house them. Most of them were in the West. There was a horse race track that was converted. So the people were living in stalls. There was a one in Arkansas. But mostly they were focused on the West Coast. Now, they're not concentration camps. They're not like the Holocaust concentration camps. But these American citizens with no connection to Japan at all lost their homes, lost their businesses, lost their farms, lost their bank accounts. They lost everything and were forced to live behind, concertina wire and armed guards for the duration of the war. So that's something to really think about. All right, I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to stop and I'll pick it up a little bit later. Thank you.